Proposing view.
Hey, Holly, we'll just give everybody a few minutes to join, and then I'll get you introduced and we can get started.
Thank you, Lindsay. Are you recording?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thomas, I love your background.
Oh, Susie.
Yeah, some of my close personal friends.
You better be careful.
You keeping those enemies close?
That's right.
I think they just made a show about you, Thomas.
Yeah.
You think, huh?
I just got
But
that.
those are tigers.
Never seen them together, so
Yeah. Hello, hello.
hi Holly,
How's it going?
welcome.
Thanks.
Hey, the hair's looking gorgeous.
Whole thing. It's still the green screen behind. It's kind of like it does its own, but yeah. But thank you.
My appointment's on Friday and I cannot wait. Oh my gosh.
I had toes done Monday morning and I felt like a human. I was skipping. I think the entire studio was laughing at me and I didn't care. I was like, toe.
Yeah, I did that in Arizona when we went because it was open. A different experience, but still was able to
Nice.
do that. So
Well, great. Thank you everybody for joining. I think we've probably got a few more people that are going to be jumping on too, but we can go ahead and get started. I'll just ask everybody to stay on mute through the duration of Holly's presentation. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to toss those in the chat, or you can just hold those until the end. So I will hand it over to Holly.
Yay! Good morning. We can still say good morning. It's 11:30 and happy Wednesday, hump day. I hope everyone is staying well and that you're enjoying the days of summer and sunshine that the season has to offer us, and that you're staying safe. So thanks for being a part of this dialogue and this conversation today, because I will tell you this is a paramount and very relevant discussion that we're having today, whether we are thinking about life in general or just looking at the world as it engages around us. So thanks for being here. We're going to offer some tools and take a look today at embracing conflict. A lot of times when we think of conflict, because I love to help friends and I love to help family members and other businesses when they have any type of turmoil or conflict. I love to help teams find strength in uncertainty. So today we're going to be looking at different elements of conflict. We're going to define what conflict is, the different types of conflicts. We're going to define it. We're going to build awareness as to how we address it. And then I'm going to provide some tools to you as to possibly how we can eradicate it, or at least address it, and the different types that we do. So as we start off and as we look at conflict, I'm going to invite you to first think about the last conflict that you had. I know that some of us have our videos on, some of us don't, but I want you to think about the last conflict that you had. So take a moment, close your eyes, and I want you to think about the last conflict that you had. And maybe it was with a spouse or a roommate because you've been in quarantine for the past 3 months. Maybe it's because you were angered over what you've seen on the media. Maybe it was an employer or a fellow colleague that maybe was furloughed and didn't communicate their workflow, and maybe you found out that they weren't really working up to their sense. So whatever it is, whether it's personal or professionally related or an outside source from the world, I want you to think about that moment. And when you have it, when you can feel it, when you feel your heart accelerating a little bit and you're like, oh, let's relive that frustration. I want you to, type into the chat, open your eyes and then type into the chat, where did you feel that tension when you thought about it? Where did you feel the tension? And I'll ask for Lindsay to moderate for me to say some of the reactions that they're seeing from people. Where do you keep that tension when you're thinking about it?
So my throat and stomach, across my chest, jaw and shoulders,
Okay.
stomach,
All right.
neck.
Yeah, stress is that. It's a lot of us will keep it there. But if you think about that moment that you just had, something happened to your body. Your body tensed, you became really, really tight. And that's what happens with conflict, is there's a constriction, a flow. Now I'm going to ask you, that's just what happened to you. What happened to the individual or the team or the scenario that you were thinking about? Nothing. So unfortunately for a lot of us, conflict is and it's defined as a competitive or opposing action of incompatibles. It's opposing views. So if you could imagine two magnets that when they are fitting together, they're going to snap. And that's what we feel. We see that there's a force that pulls them together because there's a synergy. There's a feeling of love, a relaxed element. They just naturally go together and then they cling together. But if you flip those magnets, that's conflict. That's the force that's going to push. That's the element that's going to push and shove. So today what we're going to do is, as we look at conflict, we're going to look at what the different types are, and we're going to have a fun time of bringing them to life and then looking at how we can address that. So when we look at those opposing action forces, those flipped magnets, there's some different types of conflict for us to become aware of. The first is internal, man versus self. It's the internal dialogue, the thoughts that we have that go on in our head of should I or shouldn't I? What am I thinking? And then there are the external components. And those external components are going to be man versus nature, and then man versus society. And we are going to see examples today. I have a treat for all of you. I have found some fabulous examples through movie clips that are going to truly bring each of these types of conflict together. So we're going to first dive into that internal element, because we are human beings, we are selfish creatures by nature, and we like to talk about ourselves. So let's put that internal lens and look at that. On average, in a given day, we have 50,000 thoughts that run through our brain. And we are constantly thinking in those thoughts. Do I like it? Do I not like it? We're constantly judging. And it's really not anything that we can turn off. It's how our brains are just wired to think and evaluate when we look at things. Ironically, I wrote a blog about this a few months back, and I called it greater than, lesser than, equal to. And I mentioned that when I first had an aha moment about how we spoke to ourselves and where that judgment begins is even within my daughter's school. I was looking at her first grade paperwork for math, And that's when the terms first get introduced to us of that greater than, lesser than, equal to. So we're taught just in general math, these terminologies at a young age in our society as to what am I thinking? What am I evaluating? Then of course you have home life and influences and our own personal life and influences. But our internal thoughts, this is this man versus self, this conflict and these dialogues that we have within ourself that we say, hey, how do I think about this? What am I thinking about this? So to bring this to life, I have a fabulous movie clip. We're going to be taking a trip with Disney today. We're going to first look at Rapunzel and see what internal conflict looks like and how we might be communicating in our own brains.
I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I did this. Mother would be so furious. Okay, but she doesn't know I'll kill her, right? Oh my gosh. I would kill her. I am a horrible daughter. I'm going back. I am a despicable human being.
You know, I can't help but notice you seem a little at war with yourself here. No, I'm only picking.
So have any of us had that element where we're having those internal dialogues? And it can be that internal conflict isn't just about escaping from Rapunzel's tower. That internal conflict is what we have when we're battling food, when we're going to work out or not work out, when we're going to apply for the job, when we're going to address conflict that we may or may not have with another individual. So yes, there's lots of different ways that we can relate of how our mind goes. It's building awareness again to how our mind is thinking and asking ourselves, is there possibly a way for me to stop that thought? We saw how conflicted that Rapunzel was in that last clip, and we have those dialogues with ourselves throughout the day. Did I lecture my child too much? Should I have addressed my spouse in a different manner? Should I have spoken to my colleague a different way? And it's, if you will, somebody call it that self-doubt, but it is asking ourselves that internal conflict. What are we doing to gain confidence in our thoughts? And if we see a downward spiral, how do we spiral ourselves back up? So we'll be talking a little bit about our mindsets as we look into conflict resolution. To continue on with our conversation about the different types of conflict, that's internal, which is our own thoughts, and then the external conflicts, which there's three elements of that. We have man versus nature, and man versus society. And Disney, again, is going to help us out. This next clip is from The Lion King. If any of you have children and are big Disney fans, this next clip is the end scene of Pride Rock when we have Simba that's fighting with his uncle for power over the lion's den. Way to go, Simba! So of course, obviously, we can think of man versus man. And for some of us, when we started our dialogue just a few moments ago, when I said reflect back, think about a conflict, a personal and person-to-person conflict may have been that first example that came to mind. And that's a norm, because again, as human beings, we personalize a lot of elements, so that man-to-man conflict may have been one of the first instances that comes to life. The next element of external conflict is man versus nature. And man versus nature, I think we've seen it very prevalent today. We've seen it primarily on the news with COVID. So here is a clip from Frozen and Frozen 2 demonstrating man's battle with nature.
We'll be fine, Elsa.
So, and of course, we can think of other elements, obviously COVID with our pandemic that we're experiencing, obviously man's hugest battle with nature at this time. In previous, we've had the Spanish flu, we've had droughts, we've had locusts. So it's any battle that we would have with that natural element outside as that external segment of conflict. And then the third element is man versus society. Now, man versus society can also have different sub-levels of it. So we could dive into man versus religion, man versus politics, man versus race, man versus, anything and everything that you can possibly think of. Those can be subsections. So we've made this a bigger segment of just grouping them all together as man versus society. And this next movie clip to highlight it and to truly bring it to life is a scene with John Smith and Pocahontas from Disney's movie Pocahontas, an incredibly moving and virtual clip to find to represent and actually very current with what we're experiencing today as well.
Then there's something I want to show you. Look. The ripples.
What about them?
So small at first, then look how they grow. But someone has to start them.
They're not going to listen to us.
Young man, sometimes the right path is not the easiest one. Don't you see? Only when the fighting stops can you be together.
All right. Let's go talk to your father.
Again, so man versus society in that last clip. And I think we've seen that over the decades as well with the Me Too movement, currently with Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, a very turbulent time right now within our communities. So it's looking at different ways, whether it's internal or external conflict, as to how do we look at it? How do we look at resolving conflict? How do we address it? So what I found are two fabulous men. I love the little teddy bears there. Kilman and Thomas, back in 1970s, they took a different look at conflict resolution, and they did an assessment. They revised an assessment because what they found was that the current polling that they used to integrate and to talk with individuals that said, hey, come together, how do we do conflict? It was what was socially acceptable. So everyone was like, we have to do accommodating. We have to accommodate everybody's needs. So they really wanted to do an assessment to figure out what is natural for human nature. And they found that there were five different approaches to conflict that we're all probably very, very familiar with. And we'll just highlight a bit of them here. So there's 5 established approaches, and the first one is going to be competing. Now, the competing approach to conflict is trying to overpower the other individual, trying to show that your way is the right way. So whether it be internal not necessarily an internal approach. This would be an external approach within it. Competing with your neighbors. You hear the quote constantly that comparison leads to discontent, and that's exactly what it is. It's looking at what the other person has and then competing and using dialogue to overpower and to diminish what the other person's point of view is. So from those opposing conflicts that we found from earlier, what we find is that you're competing. You're in a combative motion to try to resolve the conflict, and it's not necessarily going to get anywhere. It's just going to be a battle. So it's just competing, and rarely do we come to a happy ending with the competing element. The complete opposite, the 180-degree flip on this, is the accommodating. And the accommodating means that we go, okay, I give up. I'm not even going to try. It's looking at a conflict and saying, do what you want to do. So in the simplest of terms, it would be if our children keep begging us for, let me have the iPad, let me have the iPad. And rather than saying, no, you've already had it for 2 or 3 hours, just go and take it. I don't care. I can't even check in right now. I can't cope right now. Just go and do. The other element of accommodating would just be, again, just leading in to what they want and giving up all the terms. Typically, we walk away with bad feelings, and that comes into a keeping score element that comes into a result. The third is avoiding. And I think some of us have had experience with this with different friends or possibly different family members or different colleagues. We call this passive aggressive approach, where if we have a conflict, do we tell a friend and then we're encouraged from a friend or a colleague to address it, but we never do. We never take the time. So that avoiding is very much I'm not going to address it. I'm going to talk about it to other people. But if someone's going to come to me, I'm going to say my time, is not available right now. We're going to try to skirt the issue and not address it in any way, shape, or form. Then you have collaborating. Now, collaborating is like, woohoo, collaborating. That's what we want. We actually, that's when our magnets are starting to flip. And we're thinking what Franklin Covey called at one point, think win-win. It's looking at what that individual wants, what we want, and then coming to a consensus. It's where our negotiation skills are our strongest and where both teams come away from the experience thinking this was a good thing for both of us. We're both coming to a resolution within it. And then the fifth element is compromising. And I will use a personal example for this. If anyone's had family or friends that have gone through a divorce. The compromising is that we can't come to a collaborative element because maybe there's children or property that are involved with the divide. So we compromise and we say, well, you get to have them here, I get to have them here. Unfortunately, when we compromise, there's a thought that goes in our head that maybe if we compromised for a salary or for an element within that divide, that we didn't get what we really wanted. So it will come back to a different mindset and not a satisfactory mindset of like, hey, this actually resolved conflict and I feel good about the resolution. Typically compromising means that we're not overly over the moon as to what came together. So as you look at this, and I'll ask Lindsay again to moderate during the chat, do you find that you yourself, if you reflect on a professional level, do you find that you use a competing and accommodating and avoiding a collaborative or a compromising element more than the other in your office environment?
Accommodating, collaborating, and compromising.
Fabulous.
Collaborator preferred.
Mm-hmm. And we always want that, right? Because again, when we have conflict, many times we are looking again from our perspective or the perspective that someone else has given us. We're looking at what has someone told me about this individual and about this instance. So now we're going to dive into the conflict resolution element. So today I hope that I give you these tools, and I hope that you find them useful, both in your personal and in your professional life as we dive into some tools for true conflict resolution. Option one, number one, that we must always do is breathe. when we have that opposing viewpoint that we have for conflict, we have high emotions, and we self-reflected, and our heart rates went up and our bodies tensed up. And when we do that, we're emotionally connected to the problem. Yet when we can breathe and step back and try to, remove some of that emotional element, it puts us in a mindset that's going to enable us to reason. Because when we are emotionally charged, it's difficult to be able to find that reasonable element and that common ground. I know as a mom of an 8-year-old during e-learning, oh my goodness, there were moments when we had to breathe and just walk away because it was a new experience. It was frustrating if technology didn't work, if we didn't understand the lesson because we weren't really teachers in the household. We all just had to take a step back and take a break. Sometimes getting up, walking around helps us to do that. But what breathing does help us do when we find, the heart rate coming down is that it helps us to refrain from keeping score. And when I say keeping score, when we gather around the water cooler, when we talk to our friends or we vent about the injustice and the conflict that we feel, because it's always a personal affront for us, we're keeping scores. So we'll say phrases like, well, he never, or she always. And that's the score element. And that score element is what is going to increase the emotional frustration that we have when we're thinking and reflecting upon that conflict. Whether it's internal, it could be that internal conflict. I'm always going for the ice cream at 6 o'clock at night. I'm always eating the pint of ice cream at 6 o'clock at night. I always have to have a snack at 8. So that's where that internal dialogue can come from. But if it's external, it's always pointing the finger. It's a pointing finger mentality that is a score-keeping thought. And so refraining from that, it's going to help with the judgment. So breathing in the element of the keeping score, absolutely key in step 1 to help us to get into that proper mindset for, overcoming and embracing that conflict. Now, your option 2 is simply to ask the question. Is it true? Is it absolutely true? And how do I feel when I think this thought? Now, these questions were influenced when I read a book that was called Loving What Is, and I'll be happy to have, send a recap email for those who would, have signed up today. Lindsay, if you can get me emails. The author's name is Katie Byron, and Katie was from a very affluent family and was very frustrated with family life, and I think she had gone through a divorce, was very angry. Her life turned to a complete horrible aspect to where she ended up in basically like a community home. And as she sat on the floor one day, she just started laughing. And she realized life and internal thoughts of conflict, that when we're constantly in a battle with everything going on in that conflict element, if she could just breathe and let it go and love what is, and that's the title of her book. And she uses these 5 questions. And so her book encapsulates conversations. She then became a counselor or a coach for other individuals, and she addresses financial strife. She addresses family elements. She addresses those that have been victims of sexual assault and how to let go of anger and conflicting thoughts. So great read, really, really insightful and just really great. So when we ask that question, if we're having those thoughts of conflict, and it sounds like, well, he's always late to work, or, she never contributes and gets the reports done on time. Well, is it true? Is it absolutely true? Okay, well, maybe no, so the reports are on time some of the time. But how do you feel when you think that thought? And that's when you realize you're really tense and you're really upset. So what happens if you don't think that thought? Well, then you're happy and you're not worried about it. And you start to break down and find different ways to come off of that ledge, that anger ledge, so that you can find that room to breathe and start having the discussion. So great book, Katie Byron, Loving What Is. Great questions to have. Option 3 for conflict resolution is reverse it. Find strength in the irritant. Oftentimes it's a personality element where we look at that person and go, oh my gosh, they just talk way too much in conferences. Or we're thinking like, do they have to ask that many questions? They are asking so many questions. We just need to keep this tip of the iceberg. We need to move along and stay on task. Well, find strength. If we say that they're, too focused and ask too many questions, well, possibly they're detail oriented. And we need details so that we can have every I dotted and every T crossed. This is a great exercise to introduce to teams if you're in HR. And this helps you boil down to find out if it is indeed a personality element. I've done different sexual work harassment training. And what I've found, unfortunately, is that a lot of it comes down to the relationship that we have with the individual and then their personalities. So we don't have time to dive into complete personalities today, but we all know the DISC, that there's 4 main personalities. And we all have all of those personalities within us. Typically, what I find within conflict is that if we don't like an element of someone else's personality, it's because we find an element of ourselves in that personality. So if we think they're too loud or too gregarious, on some levels, it's because we want to be the center of attention within that. If they're too focused and too, attention detailed, it's because we want to get in there and help out with the details. So there's some element of our personality that's looking at it, but it's gauging the temperature. When I've done sexual harassment training, what I've also found is that it's a direct relationship that we have with the individual. So taking the temperature of, and evaluating the relationship that you have. Prime example, my career has been influenced greatly in the hospitality industry. So I have 20 years experience. And one of my favorite jobs was working for the Grand Victoria Casino out in Elgin. And during that tenure, there was one particular employee that had been complained about a lot. You had cocktail waitresses. So, I mean, it's a casino environment. So there were cocktail servers and, uniforms that were very cocktaily. And there was one particular manager who was complained about because they felt that he had, googly eyes that rested in, women's parts too long. Yet there was another manager on a different team that could flirt. And just off of his personality and his appearance, people accepted it because it was almost as if it was a personality element. So it truly charged and influenced a humongous conversation that we had to have amongst the team of, is it just, this creepy guy just because he wears his hair in the wrong way? Or is there a true issue going on? So there's a lot of different elements that we have to look at for that conflict if it happens within our teams and if we're addressing it for that personality element. And ask yourself, are you looking as an HR rep, if you can ask the question to your teams, what is it that first sparked this conflict between two personalities, if you're dealing with that external conflict from man to man, because we want our office relations to flourish, and we want to find that synergy. And if our teams don't get along, that's a huge element of it. So gauging the temperature is absolutely key to do. And then find your similarities, and asking the teams, when did it first happen? When did you first notice a difference? Or when did you first notice the conflict to happen? It builds awareness. So if we can find a similarity that we have with the other individual and find genuine appreciation for it, it builds a bond. So to help highlight what similarities and differences look like, and then finding cohesiveness looks like. This next segment is from another Disney Pixar film, and this is Wreck-It Ralph Wrecks the Internet, and it's a scene with Penelope when she meets the Disney princesses.
Running through here like a headless wind. Any sign of her? No.
Whoa, ladies, I can explain. Say, I'm a princess too. Wait, what? Yeah, Princess Penelope von Schweetz of the Sugar Rush von Schweetzes. I'm sure you've heard of us, so it'd be embarrassing for you if you haven't.
What kind of a princess are you?
What kind?
Do you have magic hair?
No.
Magic hands?
No.
Do animals talk to you?
No.
Were you poisoned?
No.
Cursed?
No.
Kidnapped or enslaved?
No. Are you guys okay? Should I call the police?
Then I have to assume you made a deal with an underwater sea witch where she took your voice in exchange for a pair of human legs?
No. Good Lord, who would do that? Have you ever had true love kiss? Ew, barf.
Do you have daddy issues?
I don't even have a mom.
Neither do we. And now for the million-dollar question. Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big, strong man showed up?
Yes. What is up with that?
She is a princess. Who made your gown? I've never seen anything quite like it.
Oh, this outfit?
Oh, I'd so love to have one of my own. As would I.
Me too.
Best
Me
outfit
too.
ever. I won't want to tell you guys. I'll get my mice on this. So this is love. All hail Princess Penelope, the queen of computers. Of all the thingamabobs in this entire world, I never thought I'd get to wear a real, what's it called again? Oh yeah, shirt. I once had a dream that I might wear a shirt.
Whoa. Wait, what's going on?
She's singing?
Yeah, but there was like music in the spotlight and wait, you all saw it too, right?
That's what happens when a princess sings about her dreams.
Oh, that's never happened to me. I mean, not even once.
Why don't you give it a try? What is it you really want? Sing about that.
Okay, sure. I can do that. Let's see. Oh, steering wheel, oh, steering wheel. Oh, yes, I want a steering wheel. Do-do-do, boop, wow.
I can tell you this was so fun to find all these clips. It really truly does help bring it to life. So again, taking the temperature, finding the similarities that we can truly embrace and see what we have in common. We come from different parts of our life, different parts of experiences, and what we thrive on as human beings is finding those commonalities so that we can have a sense of community for our friends and for our colleagues. And then one of the final elements to do, option 4, is have the conversation. Now, this is a very difficult thing to do for the individual that is very passive aggressive and avoiding within conflict. So here are some phrases that may help to open up the dialogue and start a conversation with individuals. The first there is, do you have time to chat? I've noticed lately, starting phrases so that things are on things that possibly you've observed, being able to come to an individual and provide some meaty substances to, hey, this is how I'm viewing things, or this is how I'm feeling. I love I was wondering if I've done something. We seem to be really, tight and close, and then, all of a sudden it's different. And then the other element, this phrase here is, when you do or say, insert their phrase that they do, it makes me feel, and I wish you'd do blank instead. If that's a great phrase, if it is a dialogue that you're really wanting to look at conflict and really address the issue. That element of feel is hard. We don't like to talk about the touchy-feely elements. We don't like to talk about emotions when it comes to work. So could they get a response and give a response back of like, yeah, I can't help the way that you feel. That's not what it is. Then asking, what can we do to work so that, if the phrases are placed differently, or if we could have more time for additional insights to work and to do that. So as we look at that element, I'm trying to, oops. Oh, gracious. It's not letting me stop screen share my, and now it's not doing anything. That's so odd.
I'm through.
There we go. So, but it's, you know, trying to start that dialogue, which can be different. It's also looking at stopping and refraining from gathering around the water cooler. And this is probably the hardest because we love to communicate to our friends. We love to communicate to our colleagues about the injustices and about the interactions that we have with others. And simply refraining from this is absolutely key. Two examples to share with you. So one of my best friends during conference calls noticed recently, with everybody being local and everything being remote, that she felt that one of her managers was really getting short with her on the calls. And I said, you know, hey, I said, what do you mean? And she said, you know, we've had great, and now I'm getting just sarcastic statements or what have you. And I said, could you consider putting yourself in her shoes and maybe considering that she's on probably 10 times more calls that you have during the day. So maybe field your questions for something different. And so she started doing that, and their relationship is back to normal. So it's just looking at different things from a respecting of time. And then the water cooler element is my friend came to me at that point, but she didn't go to any other colleagues. So we all have a circle of friends. We all have a social circle, and we have to determine at what point do we refrain and not, who can we vent to, who can we communicate to, where it remains within a trusted circle, that it's not going to get out to anyone else. So I know that if I want to vent about my family or my sister, I can go to my husband, because I know he's not going to pick up the phone and call my mom or my sister. If I want to talk to, you know, somebody about a conflict with a friend or something, I can go to my husband. I can go to my dog. But you want to ask yourself, if I do want to talk to someone within confidence, and you're afraid that that water cooler is going to explode with little fires of, you know, differences and start side, you know, conflicts along the side, stop that from even joining there. And it's difficult because you see people that, you know, that stir it up within our offices after a conference call. They're instantly calling, or they're instantly talking, they're instantly chatting during that element. But it is saying, you know, I'm not going to contribute to it anymore. And people will notice. People may even call you back and call you out and say, hey, Frank, I noticed you haven't been around the water cooler. You used to join us for lunch, and now you haven't. But by removing yourself from those instances where there is that battle, and I'm constantly encouraging individuals that when they do say, oh my goodness, I have a conflict with that manager or that individual, take time and just say, hey, do you have time to talk? I would love to just, you know, spend some time with you and to do. So as you've seen these different elements of being able, is there one that resonates with you more than the other? I'll invite you to now contribute out to the chat. Is there one that would really resonate with you more than the other? So the breathing element, having the conversation, being able to reverse it and flip it. Is there one tool that's resonating with you right now that you're thinking, hey, I've never tried that before, and that could really work for me? If you could put that in the chat, that would be great.
Breathing is a good reminder. Yeah, big fan of breathing. I like the words and having the conversation.
Okay. Does anyone have a different approach that they've previously done outside of breathing and trying to flip it or reverse it? Trying to love what is?
There's another one, emotional recognition.
Okay.
The power of pause.
Yeah. Power of pause, absolutely key within that. Being able to just take a deep breath.
Holly, this
Yeah.
is Tish. Can
Yeah.
I ask a quick question? So when you were talking about the example of your colleague and how she switched her approach in order to drive better outcomes with her colleague, did she have the conversation too, or did she just change how she showed up with her colleague?
You know, she did have a conversation. She did start the conversation with, she did a sidebar dialogue that said, hey, I've just noticed that our dialogues have changed a bit. Our conversations have become a little bit more sarcastic. And I was wondering if there's anything that I've done to, to offend, or has my performance changed? And at that point, the manager was like, no, I'm just really, really busy, which helped validate that element of I'm on conference calls all day long. And if we think about it, when we go back to that emotional piece of conflict, is that we do put the emotions within it. There was a Second City skit done years ago, and it was absolutely hysterical because it had two women on stage, and they were talking about emails. And emails and texting are so the bane of conflict, growth, because we place emotion and we place tones within those words that aren't necessarily there. Prime example, I was texting a friend at the beginning of the week to say, when can we bike ride with our daughters? And she was on Wednesday and I was on Monday. So come Monday evening, I'm waiting up at the grade school near the elementary school. And I'm like, where is she? Totally letting temperatures rise. And we, rode over to her house. I was like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, I thought it was Wednesday. And I was like, oh, that's where all that came from. So it's amazing how we can let our communications just go when we are dealing with emails and with texting. Pick up the phone, do a face-to-face dialogue, use your words, because that is truly going to help eradicate a lot of conflict as well. And if we don't like that email, back to that skit from Blue Man Group, the skit goes along where one girl goes up to another girl and she goes, here, you read this email to me. And the person goes, okay. And she goes, hey, great job on the project. I'm really glad with what you did. And she goes, no, it does not say that. It says, really good job on the project. I like what you did. And it just showcases that the perception that we have of the relationship influences how we react to the comments and to the compliments and to the feedback that we can get. Another example, my mom and sister are that. They're the flipped magnets in this situation. And I can tell my mom all day, you know what, it's maybe time for you to downsize and get a different house. And mom will be like, maybe I'll call a realtor. My sister can make the same recommendation, and my mom can go on for days and days about how my sister thinks that her mind isn't functioning. She thinks she should get a condo because she's, her mind is failing. But it's, again, the perception of that relationship. Have you yourself noticed that, where you can get a compliment from someone that you admire and respect and be like, thank you so much. And yet then you get the same feedback from someone who you don't admire or respect. And the result of how we feel emotionally, that we take affront to that. So that's another key of that reverse it, is flip it. If you're getting feedback, or if you're going into a dialogue where you're thinking, I do not respect this individual, I am not going to be able to listen to a word this person is saying. Flip it and ask yourself, if I were sitting across someone that I loved and respected, communicating the same message, how would I react? Would I instantly be on a defensive? So that awareness as to testing the temperatures of that relationship is also key within that. It's a great exercise to try to do, and telling yourself as you go into it, what is and what you can do. Are there other questions that anybody else wants to can throw out?
Hey Holly, as far as the water cooler, that's probably like the hardest thing that I would have to say for me personally. And it's not that I will like go to other people to talk about like the little things that happen. For some reason, I'm like the person that everybody else wants to tell their things to. And then I end up in all of these situations knowing how everyone else feels about each other. Do you have any advice as far as how to like just shut it down? Because there are some moments where I'm like, I don't know how to get out of being in the drama.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've used this method with many people. First off, Megan, congratulations on being an awesome spirit, because when people want to come to us and confide in us, that means that they find you trustworthy and that they find you a confidant. So that's just an awesome human trait to have. So awesome that you have colleagues that do want to come to you. To turn it and to make it productive, ask the question back to the person. First and foremost, have you addressed this concern with the other individual? And if they've said no, then to stop it, the next sentence is simply, unfortunately, I can't talk to you about the scenario any further until you've talked to that individual. And that puts the absolute kibosh on it, if you will. It stops them from coming. But we also have to, in those moments, if we say, don't come to me until you've talked to that individual, be certain that that's the case. If they keep coming back to us and going, yeah, but this is what happened then yesterday, it's like, I understand it's frustrating for you, but the two of you need to come together. And then if your component within your professional element at work is not in an HR role, you may want to tell the individual, have you gone to HR to ask for just a moderation? Can we get a mediator to have a dialogue? Can we bring someone in so that we can start the conversation? Because again, conflict are those two opposing views, but the opposing views aren't always right and wrong. And what the other person thinks is the exact opposite. Sometimes there's a conflict with the other person and the other person is oblivious that the conflict is even there. So we have to be able to, bring them together and go, hey, there's just some feelings and some turmoil going on here. We just want to clear the air. We want to know, what can we do? And that's when we make certain that we're doing that collaboration element, not the accommodating or the collaborating. And we say, we're not going to talk about it any further, because that's what helps us. Does that help you?
Yes, love it. It's hard to do, but it's good to have the strategy.
We have to tell ourselves, I'm not going to do it. In the moment that we say, okay, just what did he say? Give me a little bit more. What happened? We're just diving further into it. So we do have to step back from the water cooler and say, I simply can't. And say, if you want to network, and I'll help you set up a time to sit in. I'll sit in as a mediator. If you'd like HR present, I can arrange that for you as well. But when we start talking business and we start talking those elements, then typically they go, whoa. And if it's a passive aggressive person, I can tell you, my lifetime was passive aggressive, truly. And I remember the first time that I addressed conflict and the confidence that I felt when I addressed the issue. There's a relief. It is scary. It is scary as hell to tell someone that there's a problem and that, that sometimes when you look at them, their skin crawls. We don't want to say that. We don't want to say that. But we have to address conflict to say, look, I'm just uncomfortable in this situation. But for the benefit of our workplace, for the benefit of work project timelines, we need to find a way to communicate. So, and it takes a deep, deep breath, but once you do it, oh my goodness, the confidence that you find is absolutely key.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other comments, other questions that we can bring to the floor? Cool. So something that I do want you to consider, and this is going to be a stretch for some of us, especially if we don't like conflict, is that conflict in itself is a good thing. We cannot constantly in our life be on a high arc of happiness, of everything going up, 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 up. We have to have our ups and downs. And if you think about it as in a life element, that means that our life is beating. It's a heart monitor, if you will. Our life does go up and down, and it shows that we have good times and that we have bad times, and that we can learn from those experiences that come to us. Because if we don't have conflict, if our life is a jolly good time, what you'll notice is that we become a flat line, and then you're not living. Because every opportunity that I've ever found in my life has always been outside of a comfort zone. Every opportunity has always been in a difficult or a conversation or a new experience that I've never experienced before. And what I loved about Katie Byron's book is that when she said, you know, embrace what is, she really just says you got to step back and just embrace what's happening. And that embrace is finding the love within that moment. And Jen Sincero wrote it in one of her books as to You're a Badass, about when we see conflict happen in our life, find that happy moment. So if it is a flat tire on the way home, maybe it's an extra 20 minutes with your kids so that you can learn about how their day was and what you learn about their life. So find that silver lining. And it may sound too cheesy and too hokey, but there is a silver lining to everything. We can look at this pandemic today and we can say, this has made society as a whole slow down. And how are we responding to it? Are we meaning to fill our day with endless Zoom calls and endless elements? Like, where are we finding those moments that truly matter? What do we do to make certain that we're, you know, intentional in those moments when we go, whoa, what if we took that deep breath and went, this is what I'm supposed to be here for in this moment. It's not about me. It's about being there for that friend or for that colleague or for me to learn a new system or to learn a new technology element. And it's not always going to be easy, but that's because we are going to live. We do want that up and down. But I can tell you that when we have empathy, when we have patience, and when we're able to breathe, when we have love, love actually makes a difference and helps us to embrace that conflict different. So to close out our segment today, a fabulous clip from Love Actually, and really and truly, all you need is love. And I hope that you can find joy in this clip and bring moments to others.
Nothing you can say that can be sung. There's nothing you can say that you can learn how to play games. It's easy. All you need is love.
So I do hope that today's dialogue has made you think a little bit different as to how you can look at and embrace conflict and look at different ways that you can then engage with your teams. With that, thanks for being a part of today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Holly, and thank you everybody for joining. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Great job, Holly.
Thank you so much, Susie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
You rock, Holly.
Tish, thank you.
She does. You all rock. Have great days. Be well.